ReactJS components come in two flavors, functions and classes. The two major differences between the two are state and syntax. Both, in the end, render HTML to the web page and are modular, so they can be injected into any part of your app or your page. In this video, I'm going to write two components, a function component and a class component that for the end user display the same thing, so they'll never know. But for us, we're going to explore the differences between the two. So I have a basic ReactJS app up and running. If you don't know how to do that, I'll have a link in the description below, or if you're watching on YouTube, a card should pop up on the top right. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to create two different components that are going to do the exact same thing. They're going to display a counter on screen. So every time we click a button, the counter is going to increase by 1, and the state of the button behind the scene is also going to increase by 1. And through that, we're going to explore the difference between functions and classes, their different syntax, their different state, how they handle state, cross-page, and that should be it for this video. So let me create two components in my components folder. I'll say this one's going to be our function component. I'll just say our function comp like that. And then I'll create another one that says our class comp like that. So let me program these guys side by side. Can I do that? Perfect. Class comp, so I can close this guy. All right, so let's do the syntax first. We're going to say import React from React. And then we can do that on the other side as well. That's the same. Now the function signature. A function component says function, the name of the component, our function comp, parentheses because it's a function, opening, closing curly braces, and this returns the JSX or the HTML, but it's the JSX that gets rendered to the page. So return, and I put it in the parentheses here because we're going to have more than one line of code. So let's code up the right side here. The class signature would be class, our function, no, our class comp, extends, so inherits from, not from, excuse me, React.component. And we don't need the parentheses because it's a class, it's not a function. We just need the opening curly, closing curly braces. And this also returns the HTML or the JSX that you want rendered to the screen, but you have to render the return. So you render, and render is a function. So parentheses, opening curly, closing curly braces, put the return in the render like that. And of course, because it's a class, we need a constructor. So constructor, parentheses, closing curly braces, and we have to call the super, which calls the constructor of our React.component. So this is the basic skeleton of a function component right here on the left and a class component right here on the right. The reason I'm getting these red errors is because we're not returning anything. So let's return the exact same thing. Let's say a div, and we're just going to say, let's say h4. You've clicked, and then we're going to have some sort of JavaScript in there, times like that, exclamation mark. Let's do the exact same thing. So I'll just copy it from this guy and paste it into the return of here. All right. So we have a basic outline for our class function, or class component, excuse me, and our function component. Let's use them. So let's import them in the app. So I'm going to say import, let's just call this guy OFC from, and it's going to be in /components / our function comp.js. You don't need the JS, but I like to put it there. And then we're going to import our class comp from ./components / our class comp.js, and let's use these guys. So let's do a OFC, and then we'll do some line breaks. So BR, perfect, and then we'll use the OCC. So OCC, and let's see what our page looks like. Failed to compile our class comp. I forgot the important exporting the component at the end of the page. So export default, our function comp like that. Save that, and export default, and that was our class comp like that. Now let's go back to our page, and we have you've clicked, something times, you've clicked something times. Let's give that something times a definition. So in a function, you don't have the concept, well you do, but you don't code it like this, of this. So to create a variable in a function, we just use either let or const or var. Since we're going to change, or we're going to increment this counter, we're just going to say let count equals 0. We're going to start the count at 0. We're going to initialize the count at 0. For our class, we can't just say in a class let count. It's just floating, right? We need to say this dot count, but we're going to put it in the constructor. So when React creates a component of our class comp, it's going to have a default value or a default variable called this dot count is equal to 0. Now the way state works is we need to put this in a variable. So this dot state, and this is unique to ReactJS. If you're doing a normal class in JavaScript, that would be a-okay. But the way React works, ReactJS, is it manages an object called state, and within that state, that's where you put all of your state, your variables. So I'm going to say this dot state, and it is not, well, it is an object, so it's key value pair, so it's not a this. It's just count, and it's not equals, it's key values. So key count, value 0, and of course we don't need the semicolon there. And so we have a count variable initialized in function with 0. We have a count variable initialized within class, which needs to be initialized within a state object within the class. In our class comp, also initialized to 0. Let's use that in our code. So when we want to use the count in our code, there's no this in a function, right? So we just say count, and it'll know that it's this count here. When we want to use count in a class, we need this properly scoped. So this dot, and where is count? It's in the state. So this dot state dot count. Let me move this over just or let me just collapse this. Can I? Perfect. All right. So this dot state dot count. Let's go back to our front page and see what we get. And we've clicked 0 times, click 0 times. Let's build functions within functions and functions within classes. So a function within a function needs the keyword function. Let's call this function handle click like this. All right. And all this function is going to do, it's going to increment count. So count plus plus. We're going to do the same thing for our class, but in our class, we don't use the keyword function. Well, we could. I think we could. Let me see something. If it handles it like this. No, so we can't use the keyword function in a class. What we're going to do is we're going to create an arrow function. And the reason we create an arrow function is because an arrow function, its scope is bound to the scope or the environment that created it. So it's going to be automatically bound to every instance of this object. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll leave a link in the description to arrow functions. Or if you're watching on YouTube, top right, there should be a card there. So an arrow function called handle click. And also it's going to increment this this counter right here. So this dot state dot count and plus plus just like that. Now let's build a button that actually calls this handle click. I'm just going to say button on click equal, and the name of the function is handle click, and the button will say click me like that. Let's copy that guy over to the right side and indent properly. All right. And with properly scope everything in a class. So it's not handle click, it's this dot handle click. And let's go to the front end and see what we get when we click. Actually, let me do this because I know what's going to happen. Let me build a function that displays the state of the app to the console so we can see what's happening behind the scenes. So let's say function show me the money like that. It's in a console.log the count like that. Same thing over here, copy it over here. But because it's in a class, no keyword function, let's make it an arrow function. Equals, nope, not minus, equals, perfect. Equals chevron and console.log this.state.count. All right, so let's go to the front end and see what we're doing here. Perfect. All right, we build the, open the console. Oh, I don't have a button that says show me the money. Let me quickly do that. Let's do BR, so BR. And then we'll say button on click equals show me the money and show me the money. All right, copy these two lines over to the right. Okay, now let's go to the front. Save front. Where are we at? Show me the money is not defined. Of course, properly scoped. This dot show me the money. All right, perfect. So let's go show me the money for the function component. Count is 0. Show me the money for the class component. 0. All right, click me on the function component. Nothing's happening with the front end, but what's the state on the back end for that function component? Show me the money. The count is 1. Let's say click 2 more times. Click, click. The state of the count on the back end should be 3. Perfect. Let's see the state on the back end of the class one more time. It's 0. Let's click once. All right, why is nothing changing? We'll get to that in a second. Or if you've watched the previous video, you know why nothing's changing on the front end. But let's see what the state of the back end class component is. Show me the money. It's 1. And so this click is working on the back end. It's incrementing the state on the back end. Let's go back to the back end and fix the front end, or why the front end's not updating. If you watched the previous video, you know that when you have a class, you can't just mutate or modify the state without calling a certain function called this.setState, which tells ReactJS that not only are you changing the state of the class component, but you also want the React to refresh or reload the front end. So we're just going to say this.setState, and the count is going to be equal to count plus 1, like that. So let's go back to the front end and see what we get. Count is not defined. Why is count not defined? Where am I? Line 14 of our class comp. 14 count this.state count, set state count. It doesn't know what this count is. So I'm just going to say previous state. And what I'm doing right now was all in the previous video. I'll have a link in the description below, or a card on the top right. So instead of doing all this, we're just going to return this previous state, and we're going to return the object like that. Let's clean this up a bit. All right, let's do it like this. Perfect. So this new count we'll just say is, we don't need new count. We'll just say previous state.count plus 1. That should work. All right, back to the front end. All right, let's do one more time. So on the function component, what's the count? 0. Click me, still not refreshed. We'll get to that one in a second. What's the count on the function component? It's 1, so that works. What's the count on the class component? 0. Click me, and look at that. It went to 1. And show me the money. What is it? 1. Let's say 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is one of the major differences between a function component and a class component. In a class component, you have access to this.setState. You don't have access to it right here. Let's say I did this.setState and I said count is equal to, or not even count, let's just say count's 5. Code that out. Let's go back to the front end. The count for the function component is 0. Click me. This should, well, it shouldn't, but one would expect maybe that it puts the count up to 5. So click me. Show me the money. Absolutely not, because there's no such thing as a set state function in a class. So again, this is one of the major differences between a function component and a class component. Functions don't have state. You can't, this count only exists as long as this function runs. And if you're coming from JavaScript, you know about functions. They run once and then they stop existing. When you have a class in JavaScript, or just, this is not even unique to JavaScript, this is object-oriented programming. When you have a class of something and you create something from that class, you create an instance or an object of that class. And that object persists even if you've run a function within it. That object still exists. Once this function runs, this component function runs, it goes bye-bye. Once it's rendered to the page, ReactJS has no idea of its existence because it doesn't exist anymore. And so you can't manage state with a function. It's like a one and done type of thing. With a class, because the class creates an object and the object persists, its state persists, you can manage state within that class. So let me do one more thing before I let you guys go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 separate pages. On one page is going to be the function component. On the other page is going to be the class component. And then I'm going to navigate between the 2 pages, and then we're going to see what happens to their state. And so for that, I'm going to import a router, a switch, and a route. So import, and this comes from the React Router DOM. It's a way to navigate between pages. So import, I'm going to need a browser router, I'm going to need a switch, and I'm going to need routes. And all of that comes from React Router DOM, like that. So let's use that guy here. All right. So instead of the div app, I'm just going to say browser router. Within my browser router, I want to switch. That's perfect. And let's lay out 2 routes. So let's do route exact path equals. For this guy, let's just say /OFC. There we go. And then we'll just render. Is it render? I think it's render. Render equals OFC like this. And it's self-closing. We'll do one more route, exact path, OCC. And that's going to render the OCC, the class component, OCC. Let's properly format. Let's see if anything blew up on the front end. All right, front end. Perfect. That's the landing route. Let's go to localhost /OFC. Perfect. Localhost OCC. And we got an error. Why are we getting this error? Let's go back to the back end. I don't think it's render. It might be component. Might be thinking of something different. Component and component. Let's see what we get. There we go. So it was component, not render. So OFC. Perfect. OCC. Not OC. OCC. There we go. All right. So let's go to the function component page. Show me the money. 0 on the back end. Click me. We know it's not going to refresh the front end because there's no way to refresh the front end. But let's just see the back end. So the count on the function component is 1 on the back end, and of course it's not displaying on the front end. Let's go to our class component, CC, and show me the money. So the count on the class component is 0. Let's click twice this time. 1, 2, and it's updating on the front end, and on the back end of the class component, it's also 2. Now let's navigate back to the function component. So OFC, like that. And of course, it's showing 0, but we left the state of the function component on the back end at count is equal to 1. Show me the money. What do we get? A 0. Let's go back to the class component. Bandying back and forth. And so we left the class component on a state of 2, and it's 0 right here. What's on the back end of the class component? Show me the money. And it's a state of 0. And so this is one of the ways that function components and class components actually have a similarity. They both have amnesia once you navigate between pages or different pages. For the page it's on, a class component obviously can hold its state, a function component can. But once you navigate between pages or out of the page of the current component, that component loses its state completely. We solve this in React by using something called Context API or React Redux, which allows you to elevate local state of components to a global state. So when you navigate between pages, you don't lose the state of components, but that's for a different video. Now I said I'd leave you guys there, but let me just handle props very quickly. How do functions handle props and classes handle props? Well, largely exactly the same. So let's go back to our function comp here. If you want to use props within your function, any of the props that get passed down to this component, this function component, you put it in its signature like this, and then you can use the props like that, whatever is in the props like that. For the class, it's exactly the same. You have the props in the signature. You have to elevate the props up to the React component, and to use the props within the class component, of course, you have to properly scope things. So it's not props dot, it's this, well, auto-completed, it's this dot props dot. So that's how function components and class components handle states, largely exactly the same. And so that's really going to be it for this video. I think it's a pretty long one. How long is this one? I don't know. Doesn't matter. If you found any sort of value in it, like it, share it, subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. Comments down below. Did I say the like one? I think I did. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next ReactJS video. Might not be ReactJS, might be, who knows what the future holds. I'll leave you guys with that one. Take it easy.